Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shelby Johnson, the Distance Learning Specialist here at the National World War II Museum. And thank you so much for joining us on our webinar today with Marthe Cohn. But before we get started, I do want to go over some housekeeping items. First things first. This is just a quick review of the GoToWebinar technology. So somewhere on your screen, you will see a question mark. If you have a question at any point during this webinar, you can type it into that box, and I have Chrissy here behind the scenes. She'll respond to your questions. If you have any tech issues, you can type those into that box as well. But I always recommend, to prevent tech issues, make sure that you have all windows closed besides GoToWebinar. And should anything happen, I always recommend exiting out of the program, restarting your computer, and trying to log back in. That usually solves that problem. The one handout we have attached here, that's going to be the teacher guide that I emailed out to everyone earlier this week, but it includes some curriculum pieces, some post-visit activities for your students. And if you have not already purchased Marthe's book, Behind Enemy Lines, I highly recommend it. I've been reading it. It's a great book. And we are offering a 20% discount in the museum's web store. That link is included in the teacher guide, so you can click it directly. It'll bring you right to the cart. And that 20% discount, you're going to use the code webinar when you're checking out. Now, obviously, today's presentation is, we're actually remembering International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is not today, that's tomorrow. So we're a day early, but we are going to be focusing on Behind Enemy Lines with Marthe Cohn. And thank you so much for joining us today, Marthe. We appreciate you being here. And the first thing I want to do is show your video that you brought with you. So if you would like to introduce that to our students who are watching.
Yes, I would like first to thank the staff of the World War II Museum who invited me. I cannot give names because there are too many people, but it's the staff. Okay, and I hope that you enjoy my presentations. First, we are going to present a DVD. In 2004, Mr. Richard Trenk, the movie director of the Byzantine Center in Los Angeles, where we live, came to my home and interviewed me for 5 hours. But be reassured, the DVD will last less than 10 minutes. And now we will, so the DVD was made specially by somebody else in the Byzantine Center for my presentation in a hotel in Beverly Hills in 2004. Here's my DVD.
How does a young girl from a devoutly Orthodox Jewish family end up becoming a spy whose efforts helped to bring an earlier end to the war in Europe in 1945? The answer to that question was one that Marthe Cohn, born Marthe Hoffnung, kept to herself for the better part of a half-century. Born in 1920 in the French town of Metz in the Alsace region of France near the German border, Marthe was one of 7 children. The family was quite religious, but at the same time mixed easily with their non-Jewish neighbors. But with war clouds on the horizon in September of 1939, the Hoffnungs and many of their Jewish neighbors decided to move to a safer part of France, away from the German border, to the town of Poitiers, southwest of Paris. However, they were not safe for long. The Nazis invaded France, and with little resistance, the French government capitulated. Immediately, life began to change.
We didn't know how bad it would be. We could not understand that because even if we knew about Kristallnacht, that was in Germany. They did that to the Germans. They couldn't do that to the French people.
For a while, in spite of the various restrictions placed on the Jews, the Hoffnungs were able to go about their daily business. Marthe started nursing school and became engaged to a young medical student. As the war progressed, and resistance to the Nazis and their Vichy French collaborators became more widespread, the family began to take more chances. Marthe and her sisters hid Jews who did not have the proper papers, and her fiancé became actively involved in resistance activities. One day, French police arrested her sister Stephanie, and then her father. When her father was released shortly thereafter, the family managed to escape using false papers that did not identify them as Jews. There was a plan to help Stephanie escape from the French jail she was being held at, but sadly, it failed.
She was caught in the camp, and then later she was transferred to Drancy near Paris, and then to Pithiviers. And she wrote that they were going to be deported that afternoon of Yom Kippur 42.
Most of the Hoffnung family went to the mountains to join an older brother who was head of the resistance there. Marthe finished her nursing studies in Marseille, occasionally getting the chance to rendezvous with her fiancé Jacques. Then, in the summer of 1943, she went to Paris to work for a month in a hospital, traveling again under her false papers. She met briefly with Jacques. He was on the run for a resistance act that led to the murder of a Nazi collaborator. She begged him to stay in hiding with her.
And I told him, you cannot go back to Poitiers. You have immediately to escape and go south and go to Spain, and I will join you. But he said he has to go back. His family is in Poitiers. His brother is there. He will tell them goodbye and live with his brother and his friends as soon as they can. And he left after his examination. He left, and he promised me to write me every day. And 3 letters arrived, and the 4th one never came.
She soon learned that Jacques had been arrested along with his brother and several friends. He was tried and then executed for his resistance activities. Broken-hearted, Marthe returned to Marseille, graduated from her nursing studies, and then moved back to Paris to work for a registry. She remained there until the Allies liberated France.
When we heard on the radio that the troops were entering Paris, all the church bells started ringing, and we opened our windows and we all sang the Marseillaise. The whole city was singing the Marseillaise.
Almost immediately after the liberation, Marthe enlisted in the French army, where initially she worked as a social worker in the Alsace region of the country, close to her hometown of Metz. When her commanding officer learned that Marthe spoke fluent German, he recruited her to join Army intelligence.
I was introduced to Colonel Bouvet. He told me he needs me to interrogate people, to know what's going on, to know how the strategy of the German, if they are retreating or not retreating, and how many people are there, all this military information.
After procuring information from Nazi POWs, Marthe was ready for her spy mission. It involved crossing the border from Switzerland into Germany to see how entrenched the Nazis still were. She would then have to pass that intelligence on to the Allies. It took more than 13 tries, but Marthe made it over the border into Germany. Her cover was that she was a German nurse trying to find out what happened to her Nazi fiancé. One day, she came upon a group of German soldiers who had retreated from the Allies.
And we were walking, and among us was a non-commissioned officer who was an SS, and he was raving about the Jews, how much he had killed Poles and Jews and all that. And he loved, and he smelled Jews a mile away. That's always what they say. He was going back to the Siegfried Line. He had been wounded, and he came back from the hospital. And as we walked, he fainted. So I was a good German nurse. I took care of him.
From this SS soldier, Marthe was able to obtain important information about exactly what was going on at the Nazi front lines. Making her way back to the Swiss border, she was able to transmit her report with the help of a Swiss farming family. Marthe then crossed the border again and made her way back into Germany to see if there was anything else she could uncover.
I walked to the Siegfried Line to see what's going on. And when I arrived at the Siegfried Line, they were all gone. The last stragglers were leaving. And they told me that the Siegfried Line is empty. Do you realize what an important information that was?
The information Marthe uncovered helped to shorten the Allied effort to defeat the Nazis and saved untold numbers of lives. For the better part of a half-century, Marthe did not talk of her experiences, even with her family. But in the mid-1990s, while visiting in France, she made a request for her French Army records. When officials at the French archives saw her file of commendations and achievements, the wheels were put into motion for her to be awarded the Médaille Militaire, one of France's highest military honors, and the same medal awarded to Sir Winston Churchill by the French government. Why was she so quiet about her exploits over the years?
It was not modesty, but I thought that nobody would believe me. You know, usually a spy is a very tall, good-looking woman, and I didn't feel I was that type of person at all. I was a very unlikely spy.
To Marthe, who can tell us more about her story. And when she's finished, we'll go to our Q&A session. So take it away, Marthe.
Okay. I am sorry that I have so little time to tell you about my story. So I will be as brief as I can. After the liberation of Paris, I wanted to join the French army. It was very difficult because many people wanted to join the army. And I was not accepted because I had not the right documents. But several months later, in November, because Paris was liberated in August 1945, but in November 1945, the mother of my fiancé you saw in the DVD was executed by the German along with his brother. My fiancé was a medical student and his brother was a law student, and they were both executed with two other friends on October 6, 1945. So as soon the train was again functioning between Paris and Poitiers, I went to see the mother and I took her to Paris because she was very ill. Her two only sons had been executed, like I told you, and her husband, who was a resistant, was in the Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. So she met the army at the cemetery where two boys were buried by the Germans, and I was with her. And the army asked her, I am talking about the mother of my fiancé, and the army asked her if she needed any help, and she told them, Miss Hoffnung, that my maiden name, would like to join the army but doesn't have the documents she needs. Can you help her? In a few days, everything was done, and I was now assigned to the 151 Regiment of Infantry of the First French Army. And I left that regiment, like the front in November 1945, was in Alsace. So I left Paris in a bus for Alsace, and when I arrived, the captain of intelligence, who debriefed me, decided that I was going to be a social worker and not a nurse. So for several weeks, I visited our troops at the front and brought them what they needed, mostly underwear, socks, hats, scarves, blankets, food, and reading and writing material. And then one day, crossing the square of the village, I met the colonel of the regiment. He had in 1943 killed the first German in the metro station Barbès-Rochechouart in Paris. So that colonel stopped me in the square of the village and asked me to answer his phone during his lunch break. And he showed me around, and leaving, he told me, I am sorry, I have nothing to read for you but German books. And I answered that I read German fluently. So very interested, he walked back towards me and asked me if I spoke German. And I told him yes, as well as French. Then he explained to me that in the German army, all males from the age of 12 to old age were in the army in uniform. So any man in civilian clothes walking the streets of Germany would be noticed and arrested. That's why they needed a woman. And he asked me if I accepted to be transferred to the intelligence service of the First Army. And I accepted. And he left. And I sat on a chair and wondered in what predicament I'd put myself. Too late. 2 days later, I was picked up by intelligence officers of the First French Army and taken to Mulhouse, another city in Alsace, where I underwent an extremely intensive training for what I was going to do. After the training was terminated, they asked me to devise my own alibi, so that, because if I devised it, it would stick much better than an alibi given to me. So I devised an alibi, presented it, and it was accepted. After that, I was assigned to the Commandos of Africa, a regiment of the First French Army. And the Colonel Bouvet, you heard his name in the DVD, was commanding that regiment. And Colonel Bouvet asked me first to interrogate German prisoners of war, to learn what was a plan of attack, a plan of retreat of the German army from Alsace to Germany. We were now in January 1945. The Germans had counterattacked in Belgium, had lost. Now they were counterattacking in Alsace, coming from Strasbourg. And all our allied armies, the French army included, had to retreat west quite a bit for several weeks until we stopped that counterattack. So I interrogated generals and colonels and obtained important information. I can boast about it because in one of my medals, the Croix de Guerre, with 2 citations, in one citation it was noted, it is noted that I provided Colonel Bouvet with extremely important information about the retreat of German from Alsace to Germany. After After that, Colonel Bouvet asked me to cross the front in Alsace, and 13 times I tried to cross the front in Alsace, and I was not successful. And one crossing the front, I was very difficult for many reasons. First, we had very little information, and the information we got was not always accurate. So if I needed to go to a certain place and find something, I went there and couldn't find anything, so I could not proceed. Another reason, the military guides who knew exactly how to proceed on the ground, it explained to me how to go from A to B and what I will find on the ground. But they are humans and they make mistakes. For example, one night I was taken to a big field in February 1945. And we were in a jeep, we stopped, we got out of the jeep, and I was told to cross that field to go to a small town northwest of the field where I would find a small group of German military who were going to retreat somewhere still in Alsace, not yet in Germany. So I crossed that field, and suddenly I heard a big crack, and I was submerged in an ice-cold canal. I could not call for help. I had to do it by my own. So I finally, after a long time, found a place which was not as frozen, where I could grasp sufficiently the side of the canal to get out of it. And I never even caught the cold. But I never found the town. And at daybreak, I noticed that the prints of my boot showed that I had walked in circles. So that was an experiment. After that, the captain who directed our small intelligence group decided that I was going to go into Germany to Switzerland. Swiss was a neutral country, but they helped the Germans as long as the Germans were successful. Now we were successful, they helped us. So I was taken to Basel, where I met again Colonel Reinhardt, who commanded the intelligence service of the Swiss customs in Basel. And Colonel Reinhardt accepted that I crossed from Switzerland into Germany. And he called an agent, Mr. Lemaire, who took me by car to Schaffhausen, which was very close to the German town of Singen, where I was supposed to go. And we went by car to Schaffhausen, and Mr. Lemaire stopped the car and showed me. We crossed a small forest, and on the other side, he showed me a huge field bordered on the northern edge by a German road, country road. There was no barrier on that field going from the field onto the road. The forest and the field was Switzerland, but the road was Germany. And because there was no barrier, the road was controlled by two German military sentinels, heavily armed, who walked from the eastern edge of the width of the field to the center and stopped. The other sentinel came from the west, met him, they talked 2 seconds and turned their back and walked to the edge of the field. And they were doing that constantly without stopping, night and day. So Mr. Lemaire and I, we stayed all afternoon in the forest, and towards the evening he told me it was the time to go. And he had told me before that before nightfall, I would have to crawl along the field, hide behind the bushes, when both sentinels had met and separated and turned their back to me, walking to the edges of the field. And when they came back and separated again, turning their back to me, I had to go on the road, walk towards the east, towards the right, towards Singen. So we stayed in the forest all afternoon, and towards evening, Mr. Lemaire told me now is the time. I took my little suitcase. I had no compass, no map, no radio, no arm. I had nothing written. Everything I needed to know was in my memory. But I had vouchers for everything I needed in Germany, like hotels, restaurants, trains, buses, food, whatever I needed. And I had a lot of money in my suitcase. So when Mr. Lemaire told me it was the time to go, I took my little suitcase where there were only change of clothes, of which I had taken all the labels off so that nobody knows that they came from France. And I crawled along the field and hid behind the bushes. Until then, everything was perfect. But once behind the bushes, I became so terrified that I was paralyzed by fear. And it took me a very, very long time to overcome that fear. And suddenly something clicked in my brain. I remembered something, and that made me get up, take my little suitcase and walk on the road, meet a soldier who came back towards me from the eastern edge of the field. I raised my right arm, Heil Hitler, and he asked to see my identity card. I was now called Martha Ulrich, and like I told you, I had an entire alibi. And he looked at my card, and I wondered if he would recognize that the card was a forged card. But he gave it back to me without questioning. I was now in Germany. How much?
You have about 12 minutes.
Oh, okay. Then in Germany, I had no idea what was going on because I was sent to Germany for 2 purposes: for military information, of course, but also information how the civilians were reacting to the war and were behaving, which was extremely important for all the Allied armies to know before they invaded Germany. So in Freiburg, my sector was from the Swiss border to Freiburg. In Freiburg, I was checking and watching what the Germans were doing to do the same things. And I noticed that in daytime, there was no transportation whatsoever. The trains, the military cars, the buses, nothing functioned in daytime. They functioned only at night because of the Allied bombardments. But in daytime, when the Germans wanted to walk from A to B, they had to walk. And they always walked in groups. And I joined the group, like you saw in the DVD, where there was that SS. And he was immediately, he told us that he came back from the Russian front where he had been wounded, and he left just the hospital and came back because he was now assigned to the Siegfried Line. And during the whole time we walked, he was telling all the atrocities that the SS and the Wehrmacht had committed on the Eastern Front, which was 1,000 times worse than what they committed on the Western Front. So as we walked, suddenly, and he was talking constantly, he suddenly fainted. So I took care of him. And when he regained consciousness, he was so thankful that I took care of him that he invited me to come to the Siegfried Line and to visit him. And he gave me his phone number. For 3 weeks, I didn't go back. I had other things to do. But 3 weeks later, I came back to Freiburg, and I heard on the German radio that the Allied armies were very close and were going to invade Freiburg. So I went back to the Siegfried Line to visit my friends, the SS, and when I arrived, I discovered that the Siegfried Line was completely evacuated. The last stragglers were leaving. So I questioned several stragglers who walked independently to make sure that I had the right information. And when they all confirmed that the Siegfried Line was completely evacuated in that region, I walked back to Freiburg as fast as I could. And the city was completely deserted. All the Germans had heard that the Allied armies were going to invade. They were locked in their homes. I was all alone in the center of Freiburg. And I waited in the main artery. And suddenly a tank arrived and rode towards me. How was I going to tell the members of the tank that I was a friend and not an enemy? I had absolutely no paper proving who I was. So I went in the middle of the street and raised my right arm, which I cannot do, and as high as I could. And I made the victory sign, the V sign of Winston Churchill. And the tank, because I was extremely lucky, did not kill me, but stopped. I asked that the officer in charge comes down and talks to me, and he came. And I asked him to take me immediately to headquarters because I had important information, and he did. I was quite assertive, I must say, and arrived at the headquarters. I met Commander Petit of the Second Zouave, who was very suspicious and told me, "Who tells me that's the truth?" And I told him, I wrote on a piece of paper a phone number because we had the same technology in the French army as the American army. We could call any service on the field. He called my service to reassure him that he could trust me, and they were happy to know that I was still alive. I had no radio, remember, so I could not communicate often with them. So after that, Commander Petit sent a patrol to the Siegfried Line, which came back hours later and said, "That's true, the Siegfried Line is completely evacuated." I now was a very important VIP at the French headquarters because it was a French army I met. It was the French army which invaded Freiburg, and you can all Google it and see that I tell you the truth. And Commander Petit invited me for dinner. I was given a room, and the next morning he asked me if I want to go back to my service. And I told him, no, I do not want to go back. My mission terminates the day of the armistice. I have to cross the front today again. And I asked him for a very important thing. I asked him for a bicycle because I was tired of walking. So he gave me a bicycle and I left. And the next very important information I got, I cannot tell you the details, you have to read my book. So the next very information I got was where the exact location where the remnant of the German army was hidden in ambush, waiting for the Allied armies. And that's why I got all my medals. Thank you very much.
And that's the perfect segue. Since you talked about your medals, let's share with the students some of your medals. So here, this medal.
No.
Oh, you want to start with this one? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna put this one up closer so they can see it. And can you let everyone know what this one is?
That's a Légion d'honneur, the highest medal you can get in France.
And which one would you like to show next? All right.
That's a médaille militaire that Winston Churchill got too. And that's like the congressional medal in America.
This one.
You have no time to show all of them.
Yes, yeah? We can show all of them.
Then show this one.
Okay.
That's a recognition of the nation from France. That's a Croix de Guerre, and I told you one of the citations was that I provided Colonel Bouvet with very important information on the retreat of the Germans from Alsace to Germany. That's a medal to show that I was 3 years in Vietnam after the war in Europe as a nurse for the French army. And that one was given to me in 2014 by the German government to thank me for having helped save many lives in Germany too, because my information was provided so much that the war was shortened. Thank you.
And did you want to show this one? Okay. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your story with the students. It's amazing. And again, if you have not read the book yet, I highly recommend it. It's a very amazing book with so many amazing stories that includes your entire family, all amazing people that did wonderful things during the war. But we have a lot of questions from the students, so let's get started with those. A question I received quite a bit from students is, do you see yourself as a Holocaust survivor?
I don't know, because I was never arrested. Several times in Germany, I was very close, but I was never arrested. Am I a survivor? Sure. I was for 5 years. I lived for 5 years under the occupation of the German army, and that's I deserve the title of. Okay.
All right. Another question that we've gotten quite a bit. Were there ever any times where you felt like you were going to get caught or it was going to be discovered that you were a spy?
Yeah, many times. And do you want an example?
Yes,
okay.
Please.
When one day in Freiburg, I wanted to go back to the Swiss border because I had a farm in the Swiss border where I needed to go. And I hitchhiked because I saw other German hitchhiking with an army truck. And I asked the driver if he was going towards the south of Germany, towards the Swiss border. And he told me yes. So I went on that bus, which was an open bus. We drove all night. It was extremely cold. It was in April 1945. And I was with several Germans. We all lied next to each other to keep warm. We had no blanket, and it was an open truck. So at daybreak, the driver stopped in the countryside where there was nothing and told us that we had to get out. And we found out that we were not in the south of Germany, we were east of Freiburg. He took us where he was going. He felt if we were hitchhiking, then we will go where he wants us to go. So we all got out of the truck, and it was a little sunshine. I laid down on the grass and I fell asleep. And suddenly somebody shook my shoulder and told me to awake because there were bombardiers, planes of the American army flying over us. And anytime they saw a small group, they would throw bombs on them. So they wanted me to awake and open my eyes. I said, why? What is going on? But I said it in French, not in English. So they became extremely hostile and came walking towards me. I took my little suitcase and I said to them, I do not know about you, but my bladder is going to explode. And I ran up a little hill because before lying down, I always checked where I was to find an escape if I needed it. And I'd seen that little hill behind us, and there was very tall grass on top of the hill. So I ran up there, and from there I saw on another road very far away a cart coming, pulled by a horse. It was a milkman. So I ran towards him and I asked him, could you take me to the next town? And he said, yeah. And that's how I was saved.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing
and
that.
I had many other problems like that. I was always watching for what and ready in case I was trying to be arrested.
So that answers another question that we've gotten quite a few times. A lot of students wanted to know, were you ever scared while you were doing this work?
Yes, at times I was scared, but never like the ones when I was lying near behind the bushes waiting to cross into Germany. If I was scared for a few seconds, and then I became extremely quiet and ready for what was going to happen. And I think very fast. So I always found the right answers to the questions, and that's why I was saved so many times.
And that leads me to another question from Terry B. Terry B wants to know why you were unsuccessful getting into Germany the first 13 times you tried.
I tried to explain to you, there were many reasons. One of them was that during the war, everything changes very fast and everything is very fluid. And I was told that certain things, that I would find certain things and couldn't find them. So I couldn't proceed. Another reason is the military guides, like I told you, and that happened twice. And the first time I was arrested by the Moroccan soldiers in our army. And because I was on the wrong pathway on the mountain, and they had only received orders to protect a ghost. They never were told if it was a man, a woman, or a child. And they arrested me because the military guide put me on the wrong pathway, on the second instead of the third. So that's why. So there were many, many reasons like that, but you have to read my book. I have no time to go into so many details. Okay?
Now we're going to go back to the beginning of your story because a lot of the students are interested about your childhood and growing up in France. And Marley wants to know if you were ever treated poorly when you were growing up because you were Jewish.
There were I remember only two episodes when I was growing up. When I was 5 years old, we were leaving the synagogue of Metz, which was in a very bad neighborhood at that time. Now it's changed. It's a very good neighborhood now. But at that time, it was a very bad neighborhood. And when we left the synagogue, my father, my two brothers, and I, young boys, they were really very bad kids, started to call us dirty Jews. And they threw pebbles at us. And one pebble hit me on the chin. And I looked at my father. I was 5 years old, and I couldn't understand why we were treated differently because we were Jewish. That was beyond my comprehension. So my father understood my looking at him, and he took off his belt and ran after these kids. And I never loved him as much as that day. And my two brothers took my hand and took me home. So the second episode happened when I was about 10 years old. In our neighborhood, my mother sent me to buy a dozen eggs in the little shop very close to the house. And when I walked back with my eggs in a little bag, I met a young girl about my age from the neighborhood. I knew her by sight, but I didn't know her otherwise. And she started to call me dirty Jew. And I told her, it's true, I'm Jewish, but I'm not dirty. And she kept saying, dirty Jew, dirty Jew, dirty Jew. So I got enough. And I took my dozen eggs and I broke them on her head. And she was covered in yellow and white eggs. And I ran home and I told my mother what happened. And she told me that I was right never to accept to be insulted.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And that leads me to our next question. A lot of students are interested to know what it was like living in Nazi occupied France with all of the restrictions that they placed on Jewish citizens.
As soon as the Germans invaded France, they made all the fathers of Jewish families come to the city hall, the French city hall, and register all members of the family. That way the German had a perfect list of all the Jews in occupied France. And we were refugees in Poitiers, like you saw in the DVD, and Poitiers was in occupied France. So, and very soon we got identity cards with the stamp Jew on it. With the stamp Jew, we had no right to go to any public space, not a train station, not a post office, not any public garden or the river, to swim in the river of the town. We had no right to be anywhere public, not in a cinema, not in a store. We had no right to go in a food store until 4:30 in the afternoon, when the Germans thought that everything would have been solved. But all the owners of the store, at that time there were no supermarkets, there were only mom and pop shops, and the owners all told us, do not worry, we know what you are used to buy. We will put it aside and you come at 4:30. And as long as we lived in Poitiers, we were never deprived of anything. And all that help was punished if caught by death for the person and for every member of their family. And that gives me the opportunity to tell you that in France, 75% of Jews survived, because so many French people who were not Jewish risked their lives and of all members of their family to save us. And I'm very happy that I can tell you that.
And that brings up something from the book. In your book, you talk about how your family helped a lot of people.
Yeah.
And Spencer and Hannah B, they're interested to know what made you want to help people, and was there ever a point where you got scared and you wanted to stop?
It was absolutely normal to help other people. And we had in our family a little boy who lived with us since 1938. My oldest brother and my oldest sister had taken him out, and his little brother Jackie was 3 years old, and his little brother Josie was only 2 years old when they came to our house. My brother and sister went into Germany the day after Kristallnacht in November 1938 and got them out of Germany. And Jackie lived during the whole occupation with us. His brother was raised by one of our aunts, and both children survived the war. Jackie is now in Israel, and he's a professionally an electrical engineer, and he's extremely in a university, and he's extremely successful professionally, and he's married and has 3 children and 8 grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, it was worth saving him. His brother survived the war at my aunt's house, but he died as a soldier in Israel in the 7-Day War.
Thank you. And
But we saved, my sister Stephanie and I, we saved hundreds of people who rang our bell. We did not know where they came from. We didn't know who they were, but they needed help. That meant they needed to get out of occupied France to non-occupied France. And we sent them to a farmer, Mr. Noel de Goux, who was in DNA, a small town an hour away from Poitiers. And Mr. de Goux was very clever, and he had a farm which was partially in occupied France and partially in unoccupied France. And he saved thousands of people, and he accepted all the people we sent him and helped them cross. But my sister Stephanie, who with whom I worked on that to help to send these people to Mr. de Goux, wrote to Mr. de Goux a letter with and in which he put the tobacco voucher that the young men we had helped cross into non-occupied France through Mr. de Goux's property had forgotten in our house. And there were no postal communication at that time between Poitiers and the non-occupied France. So we sent our mail to Mr. de Goux, who mailed it in non-occupied France and sent us answers. But my sister made a big mistake of signing her real name on that letter. And the Germans were suspicious of Mr. de Goux, but he was very clever and they never had any evidence. But when they got my sister's letter that they stopped and read, they came to the house and arrested her and took her to their office to question her, because they wanted information about Mr. de Goux and what he was doing on his farm. And my sister refused to give any information. So they came back to the house and arrested my father to put pressure on my sister to give the information. But even in the presence of my father, she absolutely refused to give any information which would have been a denunciation of Mr. de Goux. So she was kept, and she was in prison for 1 month, and she celebrated her 21st birthday on July 10th, 1942 in prison. After that month, she was sent to a camp on the fringes of Poitiers. The camp was called the Camp of the Rout of Limoges. Limoges is the city south of Poitiers. And you can find that camp, the Camp of the Rout of Limoges, on Google, and would see what kind of camp it was at that time. And she was a medical student, and she started to give medical care to the foreign Jews who were in the camp. Until then, until June, now we were in July, until July 1942. These children had received no medical care whatsoever in the camp, and only the foreign Jews had been arrested. The French Jews had not yet been arrested. But my sister was sent to that camp with these foreign Jews, and I told you that she gave them medical care. She had very poor tools, but it was better than nothing. But when we wanted, the family wanted her to escape, we had found 2 French guardians in the camp who accepted to help her escape. She refused, because she felt that what she was doing for the children was too important. So I went to see her. In the camp, we could see her, one person of the family once a week. And 1 week I went to see her and reminded her that her mother needed her as much as the children. And she answered me, "Don't you realize that if I escape, you are all going to be arrested?" So on my way back to home, I decided that we were all going, all the members of the family still in Poitiers, several had left, were going to cross into non-occupied France so that my sister can escape too. And we were able to do it. And you have to read my book to read that beautiful story, how the help we got to escape. But my sister never escaped, and she was deported on September 21, 1942, to an unknown destination. And in her last letter that she wrote to a friend, because she couldn't write to us, we were already in non-occupied France, and I told you there were no postal communication between the two sectors. So she wrote to a friend in Poitiers, and in the postscriptum she added, "At the last rumors, we are leaving for Metz to work, so no need to dramatize." These are the last words she ever wrote, because years later, we found out that she had been sent to Auschwitz and she never came back. So after that, Mr. de Gouy could never do anything anymore, but he got in 2011 the title of Just Among the Nations from the Museum of Yad Vashem in Jerusalem.
Thank you for sharing that. And your sister, like many people in your family, she was certainly a hero. And our last question of the day, and I think this is a great way to end it. Shannon B wants to know, what lessons did you learn from this experience?
You know, you are students, so I'm going to tell you. I refuse to give advice to others, but to students it's okay. What I learned from that is that you have to be engaged. Everybody can make a difference, but you have to be engaged for that. And the second advice I give is, do not accept any order that your conscience would refuse. So these are the two things I get out of my, but what is extremely important is to be engaged.
Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing story with all of these students all over the country. And students and teachers, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we go, I do want to let you all know about our next student webinar that we have coming up. And this one is called World War II, Innovation and Problem Solving. And our STEM specialist here at the museum, Rob Wallace, will be joining me, where we talk all about how World War II innovators had to solve these big problems in order for the Allied powers to be successful. Again, thank you, Marthe. Thank you, everyone out there. Thank you, Chrissy, behind the scenes. We hope to see you again at our next student webinar. Bye, everyone.